Welcome to the Transformation series on Eternal Paradigm. In this series, you will hear stories from people who have transformed their lives. Have you worked out what your life's purpose is yet? What makes you tick? Are you living a fulfilled life? What is your calling? Are you actually listening?
I'm very conscious of my mortality. I've lost very close people to me. Death has always been at the forefront of my life, and I've had to deal with it in a lot of very direct ways. Because of that, I've had to think a lot about what is it that I want to be remembered for. That often motivates me to better myself and improve my own standards.
Welcome to the Eternal Paradigm Transformation series. Welcome to the third episode of the Transformation series. I hope you're enjoying your journey to find you. Remember to follow me and the podcast on socials and subscribe to Eternal Paradigm. The podcast is available on all platforms. In life, we get schooled or conditioned, I guess, into believing that you find your path and you stick to it. But you know, and I know, that that's not always true. In fact, it's hardly ever true. You are not just one thing. We, you and me, all of us are many things. We too, as humans, are evolving. We're changing constantly. But many of us get stuck in a rut and we start to see time fading away, literally running, as we continue to remain in this ever-changing world, but we forget to evolve. The world we live in is different. And as people, there is more to us than just one aspect. In most cases, that one version of ourselves that we are told to show up as isn't even our true self. So my guest in this episode is a bit of an all-rounder, I want to say. Legacy and authenticity are really important to him. I'm joined by Atif Khan. He transformed his mindset and himself physically and has gone from being overweight to becoming a fitness model. His day job is as an IT qualifications developer. In the past, he has taught DJing professionally for about a year. And for all those Tony Robbins fans like me, he shares what resulted in him having to have the opportunity even to do the firewalk. He also mentions, although we don't talk too much about it in this podcast episode, he also told me that his top 3 videos on YouTube have around 1.5 million views. And they're DIY videos. And now on reflection, I'm thinking, maybe Atif, I should have asked if they're topless. I won't bring that up here. I will move swiftly on because it's about time to. So Atif has also written and published a book. And he talks about that in our conversation, what the kind of creativity, the thinking, what was the concept around that. He also goes into some really deep and difficult parts of his life, and he's openly explored them with me in our conversation. The tragedy or the moment of deep pain and true self-reflection, along with his connection to his conscience, showed up for Atif early on in his life. As a university student, he served a year in prison in his early 20s for a driving offence that resulted in the unfortunate and the untimely death of his best friend. Atif opens up about this experience and how he has learned to use the learning from this incredibly difficult time for deep reflection, personal growth, and to use this as a foundation and a true tribute, not only to improve his life, but to always remember his friends. Ultimately, Atif is a believer in living to create a legacy by creating an impact, and I'm really pleased that he joined me to explore and share his transformation journey.
My name is Atif Khan, and who am I is a big question, but I'd like to dabble in a whole bunch of different things. So I work in education in terms of my bread and butter in 9 to 5, but I've also recently, when I say recently, in the last few years, self-published a novel. So I'm an avid writer. I also, in my pastime, DJ. So I like to, use my creativity with my musical talents. And I've been fortunate enough to teach DJing. I'm also currently a model. So I've been doing some fitness modeling and a family man. Yeah. So it's been a whole bunch of, a whole bunch of different facets to me. But yeah, that's a quick overview, I guess.
So not much then. Not
Yeah,
much at all.
I think the thing is that some people are just hardwired to be a little bit, they get bored quickly, and they kind of want to like try different things and dabble into different vocations and curious. I think that's a good way of describing me. I'm quite curious, so I get involved in a whole bunch of different things.
I like that. I'm disgustingly curious as well.
I
Sometimes a
think
bit
it's the
too
way.
much.
I think it's the best way to be. I think it's the best way to be. You get
Yeah.
to experience so many different people and things. So yeah, and not conventional single box type of person here. So yeah.
Good. That's what I like. Now, you've just told us there are so many different facets and experiences in your life that you've had the opportunity to explore. Now, what I'm particularly interested in is because this is part of our transformation series, and it's going to be January 2021 when it comes out. Now, usually January is that time of year where everyone's focusing on their health and usually around their physical health. So it could be anything to do with weight loss, body transformation. So I'm going to start this conversation with you about your physical transformation to start with, because I know that we're going to uncover lots of things. So what happened in life that resulted in you becoming overweight? Because that's always a thing for so many people, including me. So talk to me.
Sure. I think it's quite interesting. For me, the way I ended up becoming overweight was it wasn't anything traumatic that happened to me. It wasn't anything like significantly life changing. I think there were a number of small things that just enabled me to, I guess, shift my focus away from myself for a moment. I had some young kids and I think a lot of people who are parents can probably relate to this, where, suddenly they don't have time for themselves and everything is about the children and it's home, work, children, and it's quite stressful. And, I think it's hard for people to maintain a rigorous and effective workout and healthy living kind of regime when they're going through something like that. And that's, I guess, what happened to me. And I think my situation was that it was like one of those slowly kind of, it crept up on me. And when I was a lot younger in my teens, I always tried to stay fit. I was never really overweight. I never had an amazing workout regime. I used to, but I wasn't exactly, unfamiliar with the gym either. But I think it's one of those situations where people can easily fall out of it, fall out of bad habits. And then I had an office job, so I was sitting down in front of a screen, which I'm sure a lot of people can relate to as well, just typing away. And I wasn't really getting any energetic kind of hobbies. I wasn't doing anything interesting outside of like raising a family, a very young family. And I think over time, I realized that the waist size of my trousers was slowly getting tighter and tighter. And instead of doing anything about it, I just kept going to the store and buying larger trousers and larger size outfits and shirts and things like that. And I think it came a crunch point where I realized that I had just purchased a size like 36-inch waist trousers, and I'd always been like a 34. So it was like a big deal for me to go to 36. And then within a couple of months, the 36-inch trousers were also getting tight. And I was like, there is no way that I'm going to go out and buy 38-inch trousers. That's just not happening. And it was that moment really that just kind of made me decide that, no, I need to change something.
So it's interesting that you're talking about that, because for women, it's also incredibly hard to keep going up in those dress sizes. It's interesting to hear that. Yeah. So now we're going back. So at that point, you kind of went, right, not doing this.
Yeah.
So how did you manage to dig deep within yourself and find that discipline to turn things around?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think a lot of it's to do with having good role models around you, having people who are on the path that you aspire to be on. And I think that's really important to surround yourself with those types of people. I think if you surround yourself with people who are in the same kind of place as you are physically, or, if you, and I guess this can apply to any facet of life. If you're around people who are really career driven, the chances are you're going to be quite career driven. If you're around people who are quite religious, chances are that's going to rub off into you as well, etc., etc. So I think that for me, it was about having some new friends, meeting some new people who were really super into physical strength and their aesthetic in terms of how their body looked. It was really important to them. And I just asked them a simple, straightforward question. I said, how do you get the kind of body you've got? And everyone had like a different kind of backstory. But I think the reply that what resonated with me the most was that just exercise every day and just exercise in terms of do the exercise that you enjoy doing and just do something every day. It doesn't matter how small or little it is, just do something every day. And it doesn't have to have like a chest on Mondays and legs on Tuesdays and back on Wednesdays. You don't have to do that. Just do whatever you enjoy. And the interesting thing is that when you do things that you enjoy, it's more likely to become a habit because, you know, you're not dreading going to the gym because you're just going to go and you're going to enjoy it. You're just going to do the muscle groups that you want. And for me, what I ended up realizing was that some of my body was becoming really well toned. And there were other parts of my body which I had been neglecting that weren't as well toned as the stuff that I enjoyed doing. And I think over time, it just kind of became more obvious to me that I needed to focus on the other parts of my body now. And I don't just need to do the things that I enjoy, but because they had become a habit for me, I had the discipline to now focus on the exercise that I didn't necessarily enjoy. So even though the fun factor and the enjoyment factor kind of got me started, and it was almost like tricking myself into getting into it. And eventually, when I look in the mirror, I can see that, oh, this looks good. This doesn't look good. So now you need to focus on those areas and tone those areas up. And because I'd had to create a habit out of it, it was more easy for me just to kind of shift machines and shift exercises and go to the gym and talk to other people about how do you target like your hamstrings, for example? How do you target your glutes, for example? So eventually over time, I kind of kept that discipline. Every day I need to do exercise. I need to do something. Doesn't matter what I do, I need to do something. And I think the results started speaking for themselves in my case. And people started asking me, what am I doing differently? Obviously, coming from an Asian family, the first thing older generation was like, oh my God, you've lost so much weight.
Of course.
Are you okay? You look so weak. You know, in Hindi and Urdu, right, you
Yeah.
this word called kamzor, right?
Yes.
Kamzor actually translates to weakness, right? So, but they use it for someone who's slimmed down at the same time. So just because you slimmed down doesn't mean necessarily you're weaker. So whenever someone says, "Oh, you've gone kamzor," to me it sounds like, because I'm an English native speaker, but I also understand Urdu. For me, it sounds like, "Oh, you've gone weak," right? And actually, this is the strongest I've ever been, but I look slimmer. So
The irony.
yeah, exactly. The irony of it. And just for me to explain that to that generation that you don't have to be overweight to be strong. And I think that was one of the challenges, I guess, of losing all the weight and gaining the muscle, which is interesting.
I am truly fascinated with the cultural perception of that because just in your experience, does the use of the word apply differently to men and women?
Mm. That's interesting. No, it doesn't actually, because I know my sister.
Yeah.
Well, my family, my sister had a very similar situation where she was putting on some like puppy fat or whatever it is, and then she went to the gym and she started losing weight. And people I heard saying to her as well, "Oh, you're becoming kamzor. You're becoming kamzor." And again, it's about for me, it sounds like, "Oh, you're becoming weak or frail." And that's for people who are of the generation or who understand nourishment, understand what a healthy body should look like. I think it's that cultural difference in like Pakistan, for example, and India, I imagine, to be quite almost like built like a wrestler in terms of like your body build.
Yes.
What is considered like healthy.
Yes.
Actually, if you get BMI check done of that person
Oh, yes.
healthy in this country or in the Western country, people will say, "Look, you're on the verge of diabetes, or your blood pressure is through the roof because you're overweight." But that's not what they think back home. Back home, they think that actually you're active, you're doing well, and you've got a good belly around your waist. That's the sign of
Oh,
it's a sign
gosh.
of wealth.
Yeah. Yes, it is fascinating though, the cultural perception of what is considered to be someone who is abundant,
Mm.
it's quite, yeah. I mean, we're learning how unhelpful it really is.
Yeah.
Moving on from that, just before we move on to where you are at now with it, I just wanted to ask, did you have an emotional relationship with food? Or there's this, again, food and culture come together because we're both part of cultures where feeding and to feed and to eat these immensely rich, flavored foods are so, it's the norm. And so how did that come about with you?
It's a really interesting concept. I mean, the thing is that it comes down to, again, the cultural diet. And I think in South Asian culture, you find that the foods are very rich in carbohydrates. Almost everything is fried, whether it's deep fried or whether it's shallow fried. Oil is used in almost all of the cooking. And I think it's quite, in terms of the actual nourishment of it, even if you're cooking vegetables, by the time you've cook them the process of cooking them, almost all the nutrients have actually been taken out of the vegetables, and you're really not eating anything that's that healthy. On top of that, you're having like chapatis and naan at night, which is actually considered not great. It's usually quite heavy meals. And then let's not even get started on the desserts. The desserts that you have in our culture, in terms of the type, the amount of sugar, even like if it's a celebration or any kind of occasion, you go to Ambala, which is like a known dessert, sweet confectionery place. So I think for me, the hardest thing was to refuse food in places where people will be surprised.
Interesting. Yes.
Yeah, I would refuse to eat it. And it's really, I think that's the level of commitment you need to have where your mum, when you go to see your mum and she cooks something and you say, Mum, you know what? I love you and this looks great, but actually I'm not going to eat this anymore because I'm not eating fried food anymore. And the interesting thing is that if you stick to that discipline, the world will evolve around you. And, there will be some resistance in the beginning. People will make you feel awkward and stuff like that. And it's about being polite, considerate. Someone put a lot of effort into that, making that food for you. And it's about acknowledging that, sitting down with them, but eating what is on your list of things that you should put in your body and you shouldn't put in your body. And, it's I've had some really awkward situations where I've been to like a relative's home and they've had a dawat, which is like a feast for us, as part of the guest.
Yes.
Yeah, so I'm sure you've been to loads of dawats yourself.
Yes.
Yeah, so I mean, like you would know, like the hardest thing to do in this situation because it's almost like an insult is not eat their food. So I mean, what I do is I look at what's there, and you might have the roast chicken, which is fine to eat, so I'll have that, but I might not have the rice because it's white rice. I might have the salad, and usually the salad is just like almost like a decoration. It's not even supposed to be part of the meal, right? It's just there on the side. No one really touches it in Asian cultures. But I would just go crazy on the salad. I go crazy on the salad. I go crazy on the chicken. I have water or some sugar-free drinks. And that would be me. And I would just be polite and I would just say, this is what I'm going to eat. I'm full. Even if I'm not full, I'm just saying, I'm really full from before and I'm okay. I can't really eat that much today. And it's all really nice and stuff like that. But eventually, what I found in my situation is that people know what I eat and then what I don't eat. And then they start changing So my mum now cooks differently to how she cooked before I went on this journey, whenever I'm over there. And she's also seeing my progress. And, she feels that she needs to lose a little bit of weight herself. So she comes to me for advice and I tell her about the food that she's eating, how important it is to change that. And she's making changes now as well. So I think the proof is in the pudding when you stick to your guns and people start seeing that you're getting results and they see how disciplined that you are. I think it does kind of make a difference to other people's perceptions on food and what's right and what's not right to eat.
Yeah, that's good. It's good to hear the change. And also, it's been really, like you said, those awkward situations when you're like, no, I can't eat that. And I know that very well because I've suffered with lots and lots of food intolerances and allergies for a bulk of my life. So to have those awkward conversations to say, I'm so sorry, I can't eat this. But then it turns into a almost like the other person feels like they haven't serviced you or they haven't welcomed you and they haven't taken your needs into consideration. And then it just turns into this guilt fest. And it's like, oh gosh.
Yeah.
I want to move on now because you said you're now a fitness model. And was this ever the aim when you started out your physical transformation journey, or has it just kind of happened?
No, not at all. I mean, I never thought that anyone would be interested in taking photos of me, to be honest with you. But I mean, it's one of those things where I think there's something attractive about the discipline of putting yourself through a regime of healthy eating and saying no to sugary foods and exercising every day. And I think there's something attractive about that that manifests itself in a good looking body. I mean, what is the psychology behind someone who's aesthetically pleasing to look at? It's because they've taken care of themselves, which requires discipline, which I think reflects on someone's mental strength. And I think, it all goes down to the pecking order in terms of, choosing the ideal partner and all of that caveman kind of instincts that people naturally have to people who they think are strong, protective and good provider and all that kind of stuff that you get from the overhang, I guess, from evolution. But for me, I think it's really important to do that, and I think people want to now recognize that. And I'm not a shy type of person. So when an opportunity came about, and a few people were talking to me about potentially modeling, and I was like, well, I'm not really too sure about it. I'm not really too sure about it. And then I went to see a modeling agency, and they were really quite interested in taking me on. And it wasn't just about, necessarily fitness modeling, although fitness modeling is probably the category I'd say that I would choose if I had to choose one. But I've also been lucky enough to have opportunities to model for internet brands, without selling products, sunglasses and things like that. And I think it's just that aesthetic of someone who just takes care of themselves and is able to portray that level of higher standard for their own brand. And I think that's what I wanted to be part of. And I thought it'd be kind of cool because I'm getting older and I don't know how many years of a good body.
No, we're not getting older. That's not true.
I'm trying not to live in denial, about my midlife crisis. But it's one of those things where eventually, we're all going to kind of, we have a finite lifetime. And I think that what I don't really want is I don't really want to have any opportunities in my life where I look back and think that I wish I had done this or I wish I had done that. And I think for me, the modeling is really just the manifestation of all the hard work that I put in just taking care of myself, because I decided that before I die, I want to have a really good body. Because I've never really had always had like an average body, I guess. But I've never had like a great body. And I wanted to say that I had that. I wanted the photos to prove it, so my grandkids could see that, hey, look at granddad when he was in his heyday. Look at what he did, that how he kind of like had that self-discipline and motivation. And because it is really tough, you have to train when you really don't want to train, especially when it's like 8 months of cold weather in this country. And it's really hard to like discipline yourself to go out and either train in my garage, which is always cold, or go to the gym and you have to get in the car and drive to it. And just that whole mental kind of, there's so many reasons why you could say, oh, I don't want to do it. I just watch some TV. I can just chill out at home, just relax.
Yeah, all of those reasons. Yeah, yeah.
Exactly. But no, it's definitely one of those things where you just feel like you need to have that motivation, that self drive. I think that's what's attractive.
Yeah, definitely. And you said something really interesting because you're talking about physical aesthetics. Now, I'm a little bit, just a little bit older than you. And so I'm kind of part of this generation where I saw the change from analog to digital. And this is like before social media, before the internet. Our perceptions of our physical self was based very much on general media perceptions. And those perceptions were very much that so-and-so looks this way, oh, let's make them feel bad. But actually, in turn, the psychology was to make you feel inadequate as the consumer of that media. And yet, I think social media has kind of helped to turn that around in the sense that now I follow millions of people on Instagram who have gone about their own journeys in their physical transformation. And it's actually incredibly inspiring. No one's made to feel like rubbish, if that makes sense. And the fact that we're a lot more open about our feelings help. And on another point, the other thing that you talked about is when it comes to your grandchildren, the fact that you've actually thought that far ahead. So you've already kind of reconciled your legacy of what you want it to be, whether you're here or not. And I think that is incredibly important as a driver. But I don't know if that's kind of helped you.
It's really interesting that you mentioned that, because legacy is is a lot more important to me than I thought it would be for some reason. And I think at some deep level, we all want to be remembered. I think there's some human kind of instinct that we want to leave a mark on this earth. It might come from the ego, or maybe not everyone feels that way, but I certainly do. And I think I appreciate that, especially with this whole year, this whole COVID. So many people have lost their lives. And so many people are going to be mourned by their families and loved ones. And death is one of those things that's just part of life, I guess. And I'm very conscious of my mortality. I've lost very close people to me. So death has always been like at the forefront of my life. And I've had to deal with it in a lot of very direct ways. And I think because of that, I've had to think a lot about what is it that I want to be remembered for. And when I think about that, that often motivates me to better myself and improve my own standards, whether that be I want to be the best dad in the world to my children. I want to be the best son to my parents. I want to achieve this great body to demonstrate that I had this discipline to take care of myself, regardless of my age. Even the modeling, which is all kind of like, it's really just collecting evidence, really, of what kind of character I was. And I guess they also kind of like, which we might talk about later, was to do with the novel that I wrote, which is all part of legacy.
Yeah, absolutely. Before we move on to those, because I have loads of questions for you.
Yeah.
You should know that. So, like you said, is modeling itself can be very tough because you have to have that discipline invested in yourself in order to show up, not only to work out, to eat properly, to have that dialogue within you constantly to make sure that you're showing up to be able to collect that evidence. But modeling as we've known it again over the years as a career has had a lot of bad press because of the physical abuse that people put themselves through. And there's a lot of mental health fog around this as well. Now, with you, I'd like to look closer at and explore mental health stigmas, especially those that men face. And if we could potentially, if you can explore this with me and look at it around, has this impacted your life? Have you felt at certain points or people that have struggled with themselves physically and mentally?
I think in the modeling industry, you'll find that there are definitely a lot of people who you would never imagine would have the insecurities that they do. And I think there's because everything is based upon your physical appearance, the way you look is everything when it comes to modeling. So you have to always try and bring your A game. People I've heard, they could suffer from bulimia or anorexia, and it's quite common in models, or female models predominantly in the industry that I know that I've met. You've also got guys who are on the other side of things who might overly spend too much time in the gym or have their entire lives revolve around their self-care regime in terms of manicures and haircuts and grooming and stuff like that. And some of these people have actually made a lot of money on YouTube where they have then created videos and have become very successful. And interesting enough, actually, if you peel away the layers of those people, you'll find a lot of them have like very deep psychological issues as well, and they're trying to battle with their own demons. And I think that not everyone can control what they look like when they're born. It's one of those situations that you're given the looks that you're given. And for some people, the symmetry in their face makes them aesthetically pleasing to other people. And then if they take care of their bodies and nutrition on top of that, they might be considered a model potential. But in terms of their mental health, because it's unseen and the camera doesn't always show someone's mental health, it's often dismissed. And there's no measure for it, so it's neglected, and no one actually takes care of their mental health. And I think if I had been in this industry from a young age, that could have impacted me a lot worse. But I think for me, because I'm secure in my own abilities, because modeling isn't everything for me. It's just something that I'm doing as a hobby. It's more fun than anything else, really, on the side of my day-to-day work, which is obviously working in education. I think that some people who base their entire lives around how many followers they have on Instagram or how many likes they get or how many people are praising them constantly. I know people who go into depression if their posts don't do as well as previous posts. They overanalyze it and they're highly critical of themselves. So it can, and it's a very ruthless industry. Today you might be getting lots of work, and tomorrow you might not. And it could be one of those things where it's really hard to have consistent income. And you can look at your own physical aesthetic and feel quite bad about yourself if you're comparing yourself to other people. And I think that happens a lot in the industry as well, which isn't great for the mental health.
Definitely. You touched on so many points there. And I think previously, where I mentioned social media, the other side of social media, you've kind of shown the other side, how we know it can be so destructive for people who are already incredibly fragile. Now, we are taking a journey into your life. And this is now, I'm going to move on. And this brings me on to the fact that you have spent a year in prison for a driving offence. And can you describe that experience, what you learned that transformed you, and your ultimate perception of your personal design for life? Because there was an incredibly tragic outcome here. And if you're willing to share that, please do.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think for me, it's been one of those situations in my life where I've had to talk about it a lot. So I've become comfortable about talking about it, and I'm more than happy to kind of share the story with your listeners as well. When I was, how old was I? I think I was 20. I was between 19 and 20 years old. I had a really bad car accident, and in that car accident that happened in East London on this terrible rainy day, I was driving too fast for the conditions. I had just bought a new car, and I was showing off with my friends from university at the time who were in university. And I lost control of the car, and my best friend, who was sitting in the back, and he passed away. His name was Sahim Raja, and he was basically my best friend since I was in year 8. So year 8 all the way through secondary school. We went to sixth form together, and we spent basically every day together. And then, even when I went to university, we kind of like regularly stayed in touch, and he'd come over all the time, and I'd go see him. And it was the most surrealist thing, because one minute he's in the back of my car and we're talking, and the next minute I'd never see him again. I literally never saw him again. We had, the car fishtailed as I lost control around a bend, and we've kind of like drifted into the oncoming lane of traffic, and there was a car coming down the other side, and the car slammed into us side on, and the car, my car hit a really high curb, and it flipped a couple of times. I ended up having a broken ribs, and my forearm and my left arm was broken in 4 places, which I needed metal plates for about a year and a couple of surgeries. My friend who was in the front seat, he fell into a coma. None of us were wearing seatbelts, and he had internal fluid in his lungs because of cracked ribs. And but my friend in the back, he passed away. And it was just horrible. And I think it was just one of those situations where I was trying to heal, obviously, from my physical wounds. And at the same time, I was now dealing with the news that my friend had died, and trying to cope with the fact that that was all my responsibility and it was my fault, basically. And then some bad advice from really well-meaning people at the time. And you really don't know what to do in a situation like that when you're that young. And when people tell you that this is what you should say to the police and this is what you should say to your lawyers, and try to orchestrate this web of excuses, and which is basically what I did. It all kind of like backfired at the end. And, clearly I should have just told the truth in terms of what happened to the judge and my court case and everything else. But I came up with all these excuses, which really was not what I felt comfortable with at the time. But people were telling me that my life would be over if I didn't go with these stories. And so that's what I ended up doing. But it was a really horrible situation. The nightmares lasted for years after that. And it's just one of those things you never really kind of completely get over. So it was just a really traumatic situation to have to go through, especially when you're that young and you feel like you've got so much potential. And then when they eventually convicted me, it was a really heart touching situation, because my friend's father, who I used to call uncle because I used to go around his house all the time, he turned up out of nowhere with his other sons. So my friend Sahim's brothers, and they came to the court on the day of my sentencing. And I had not spoken to these people. There was police and lawyers and processes involved. And I couldn't really feel like I could face them, because I felt so guilty about everything that I had done.
Yeah, of course.
So when they turned up on my sentencing, I thought that his dad was there to like hit me or punch me, or get his final like kind of anger out on me before I went into prison. And my lawyer has told me that, I need you to prepare for 4 years because I think that's what you're going to get for causing death by reckless driving. So I tried to get some witness statements and people to say good things about me, but none. And I had a whole folder full of statements, and I had no previous convictions, and this was the first time that ever anything had happened with the police with me or anything like that. And his father just came over to me and just hugged me and just gave me the biggest hug. And I just broke down in tears, and he was crying and I was crying. And he looked at me and he said to me, "No, I didn't even know it was your sentencing today, but last night." And this man is a doctor. He's an intelligent man. And he said that last night, Saheem came to me in my dream and he told me that Atif is in trouble and I need you to help him. And
Wow.
just with that, he said that I cancelled all my appointments for my surgery today. And I found out that today was your sentencing and I had to come here and help you. And I don't know what to do. And he spoke to my solicitor, and through some special circumstances, he managed to take the stand on my sentencing, which is basically never heard of. And he pleaded with the judge to show leniency and mercy. And he said that, look, I've already lost a son. If you take Atif and take him to prison, I would have lost a second son. And you just can't put into words, people who are so selfless and compassionate. You can't really make any sense of that. But that's what happened. But despite that, the judge said that after, this morning when I was having my breakfast and I was coming here, this is what the judge was saying to me. He goes, that I was going to give you 4 years. But after listening to Dr. Rogers' testimony, there is no way that I couldn't consider that. And I'm going to halve your sentence to 2 years and you'll spend 1 year of that in prison. And that's what happened.
That's incredibly tragic. And it's so exactly like you said, to have that hug. What an amazing man. What an amazing man.
Yeah.
And thank you. I can hear in your voice that it wasn't easy to go back to that time and talk about it.
Yeah. I mean, no matter how many times you tell the story, it's just always the emotion's always there for me because it still overwhelms me. Like, how someone can be so compassionate, really. Because, I can imagine if I had lost a son and there was this friend of his that was responsible for it. And I even asked my own dad, I said to him, Dad, if there was the other way around. And my dad was like, if it was the other way around, I would have killed that son. I would have killed the other child for taking you away. And, and he couldn't even imagine turning up to the court and begging the judge for mercy for that child, But that's what happened in my case. And I spent a year in prison and it could have easily been 4 years. But even that year was just so hard because I was just constantly living in regret and I just didn't know how to make it right. And even though I was in prison, I felt like I still hadn't paid for it. And I realized now, so many years later, that there's nothing that I can do that would ever bring him back. And I can just try and be the best person that I can be because Saheem was going to be somebody. He was smart, he was educated, he was on the right track. And I comparatively wasn't. I was a university dropout. I was in some sales job and I was making lots of money. I was ducking and diving and hustling. And I was like, that's not really a long-term strategy. Going to prison made me realize how I needed to turn it all around. Because if God chose me to survive, I need to be better than what Saheem would have been in this world. My legacy needs to be greater because I owe it to Saheem's memory and I need to be better.
That's a beautiful way of looking at it. That's incredibly powerful. And so would you say that on that basis, almost every day, everything that's happened has been in some way to keep his legacy going too?
Absolutely. Like my first son, like my firstborn, I named him Saheem.
Wow.
And I did that because I wanted to never forget him. I never wanted to forget him. And I never wanted to forget why I'm pushing myself and why I'm doing the things that I want to do and striving to be the person that I am because I say his name 100 times a day, even today, because my son is around Saheem, and my son knows a story about why he's called Saheem, and I know, and I don't want to forget. It's like I've got a huge scar on my left forearm from the car accident. And when I was getting my final surgery done, they offered me plastic surgery to get rid of the scar. And I refused it. I said, I want this scar because I want to, every day when I wake up in the morning and I wash my hands, I want to be reminded of how stupid I once was. And that the fact that someone is no longer here because of that stupidity. And although I've kind of come to terms with it all, the scar is there to remind me to be better. So those kind of reminders are things I put in place for myself so I don't forget.
Yeah, that makes sense. And have you been in touch with Saheem's family? Are you in touch, or you don't have to answer?
No, it's just fair. For the first 2 years after I came out of prison, I kept making excuses why not to see him. So during the court case, I didn't want to see him because I felt once I'm proven not guilty, I can go to his house with a clean conscience. But that didn't happen. And instead, I was given a guilty. And so I definitely don't feel like I could go to them. But then his dad turned up on the court hearing, like I told you. So I felt like he was angry at me, especially the fact that I hadn't even gone to visit these people. That's another thing I have to tell you. Like I didn't even have the guts to go and face up to them. I couldn't even do that. And what I ended up having to do, just to make them realize that I'm not heartless. I used to leave flowers on his birthday in front of the house. And I just used to knock, and sometimes I used to leave a card, sometimes I didn't. And then his brother one day messaged me on Facebook and he said, Atif, you need to stop doing that because every single time you do that, it just tears my mum up inside. And she would rather you come in and talk to us rather than just leave flowers and stuff like that outside. It's just really hard for her. So don't stop doing that. So I had a really good heart to heart with him when I met him, and he explained all of this stuff. But other than that, I couldn't really face his mum. I couldn't. I just couldn't. They knew my family. They knew my mom, my grandma, everyone. So they all met up, and I used to try and get messages across, but I just never, I could never face his parents. I just can't. I just can't. And I never have.
It's not easy sharing that.
Yeah.
And is that where you're at now, or do you see things potentially changing?
I mean, I would love to say that it's on my plan to go and see them and stuff like that. And I would love for an opportunity to kind of present itself. Or I haven't thought about his parents for a while. So, I mean, this is obviously 20 years ago now. So it's been a long time. And I'm sure they've kind of made peace with it all and they know what the situation is. And they know that I called my son Zaheem and I got a message from his father telling me how sweet he thought that was. But in terms of actually just going over there, and I don't think it's necessarily needed anymore. It's one of those things where I think it's necessary. It was necessary, and there was a time, and I think there was a window for it, and I think that window has gone. And I've arguably I've taken like the coward's way when it comes to like not seeing like facing his mom and facing his dad. But I think we've all kind of just dealt with it in our own ways. And no matter what I say to his parents, they know how sad I am. They know how sorry and upset I am. His father came and told the judge that we were like brothers. So I think that they know that I'm sorry, but I'm so ashamed. I feel so bad and guilty to this day that I just don't know how I could face them. It's just one of those situations.
It sounds like Saheem's dad has shown you the ultimate form of love and compassion. And that's an amazing way for it to almost like show up at a time when things were just so, so dire. So, are you okay?
Yeah, no, I'm good. I'm fine. I mean, obviously, it's a lot, but I think it's rich. It's rich with lessons for everyone, and maybe people can hear this and take something from it. So that's why I had to share the story.
That's very courageous of you. Thank you.
Welcome.
I'm going to move on from here because right at the beginning, you mentioned DJing and that you've written a book.
Yes.
Yes. Now, I am intrigued about this book and I would like you to share the information with our listeners and also to talk about how it all came about, what happened, and I mean, how recent was this as well in terms of the book?
Okay. So the book was published 3 years ago, but it has been 8 years in total since I first started writing. So 8 years ago, I first started writing, And it was really a really strange thing. Really, ever since I was a teenager, I remember feeling that I had this story. It's a very simple concept about being able to control time and just being able to stop time. And I'm pretty sure it was inspired by a TV show that I grew up watching. And I can't even remember the name of the show, but it involved the girl, the main character was this little girl who would be able to touch her fingertips together. And when she would do that, everything around her would just freeze in time, unless she touched someone, and then that person would unfreeze with her, and then they would both experience the frozen world. So I don't know why, but that really kind of like resonated with me to be able to stop time. And so I started writing this very basic. I just one day opened up Microsoft Word and I just started typing, and I became so descriptive in my narration of the short story that it quickly I realized that this is becoming quite a detailed novel. And then I would talk to people about the story and the characters within the story and what was happening. And I didn't have any plot line. I just would escape into my story whenever I found like I had some time or on my hands, or I just wanted to write. So I would just type away and I would just get lost in this world. And it was really quite engaging to me on a very deep level to be able to create these adventures for these people and the kind of things and experiences they would go through. And what I tried to do was to make it personal, was to integrate experiences that I had in my own life into the story in subtle places and weave them into the characters and the experiences that they're going through throughout the book.
I love it. And where can people find the book now and what is it called?
Okay, so the book is called The Time Stopper, The Quest for the Mayan Stone. And the title kind of gives away the fact that in 2012, I'm not sure if people still remember, but in 2012, around December, there was this huge thing about the world coming to an end, right? So
Yes.
you might have heard of it, even though it was on the news everywhere. So apparently, the backstory for that is that the Mayans had created this calendar that had abruptly stopped on the 21st of December 2012. And so, according to the calendar, which also predicted with very specific accuracy celestial events that would happen and the moon phases and the planetary and the star alignments, the Mayans were really good at astrology. And so, sorry, it's not astrology, it's astronomy.
Yeah, astronomy. I
Astrology,
just had to say that.
astrology is like Virgo and Capricorn.
Yeah.
Astronomy. So they had this amazing calendar, and everyone was like, "Why does it stop on 21st of December 2012?" And then on top of that, there was this really interesting anomaly that happened with this robot that calculates stocks and shares for the World Trade Centers, and this robot predicts weather forecasts. And this robot actually also predicted that on the 21st of December 2012, there will be a huge cataclysmic alignment in the polar ice caps, which the magnetic field could affect and potentially cause the polar ice caps to actually rotate on their axis and the polarities of the Earth actually reverse. So the equator will become the north and south poles. Basically, the Earth would shift on its axis completely. And all of this would just cause widespread weather, climate changes, and people would just die out instantly. Like people would, within a week, everyone would die. So I knew all of this stuff. And I was like, I need to weave this in to this time stopper plot somehow. And so that's what I did. So I got this information, and it's a little bit like Dan Brown's stories, where he introduces some facts and stuff like that, and then he kind of takes his own interpretation, creative prerogative on it, and it just weaves into a story. And that's what I did. So I got these facts that were out there, and I said that the reason that the 2012 disaster didn't happen is because of my protagonist and because of the main guy of the story who actually saves the world. And he goes through a series of Indiana Jones style tasks. So if you've ever seen the Temple of Doom, which is a huge influence for me in this story, you find that all those kind of underground ancient tombs and like booby traps and like all of that's woven into it because I feel like such an amazing adventure story. And he's trying to find the stone that's trapped underneath the pyramid that's just
Wow.
filled with booby traps. and he has to get out of it, and people die along the way. It's gritty, but it's aimed at young adults in terms of its keen demographic. It's available on Amazon and Kindle as well, so you can time stop with The Quest for the Mind Stone.
Brilliant. I have one last question for you.
Sure.
And that is, what did you learn? I mean, I think you've mentioned that when you were writing your book, it was very much about going into the possibilities and weaving together fact and fiction. And because your protagonist goes on to save the world, there seems to be kind of an underlying theme of human potential being limitless, which takes me on to my next question, which is about you. You've walked on hot coals.
Yes.
What was that about? How did that come about?
Okay, so yes, I have. And I guess when I came out of prison, one of the things that I really wanted to do was give back. And I ended up working in a charity for a while, which was based in Hackney. And it was helping young, predominantly Black offenders. It was helping them get out of their kind of gang mentality and stuff like that. And while I was there, I was working alongside some really aspirational, inspiring people who were all there for some great causes. And one of them, her name was Cassandra. She was working with me, and she was a Tony Robbins fan, right? She was.
I am too. I'll put my hands up to that.
You are too, right? Yes. And I've become one as well. So Tony Robbins, as you probably know, is this larger than life character who's like absolutely hugely successful with mind coaching and life coaching and self-development, things like that. So she was telling me about this event that he was called Unleash the Power Within, or UPW. And basically it's a 3-day event, and it was happening in London. And apparently it was one of his last final live events in the UK. So he was, she managed to get me a ticket, and I managed to get the time to go. And I ended up going, and it was one of the most powerful it was the most transformative experience I've ever had outside of my prison situation. And it happened so closely after I was released that it kind of like catapulted me, I think, personally on this journey of self-development and being curious about life and really living my life, really kind of getting out there and making the most of it. And part of this process was about unpacking a lot of your psychological demons and coming to peace with a lot of things. A lot of it was also about your nutrition and taking care of your health and what goes into your body. But also a lot of it was about mental strength and overcoming physical barriers because of the mental paradigms that you have. And so a very common one is the physical components and the physical composition of heat and how heat can burn you. Mm-hmm. And there are people in the world who actually have controlled their minds to such an extent where they can endure freezing cold temperatures as well as burning hot ones.
Indeed. We see this with the legendary Wim Hof, right?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, absolutely. So it's a big, huge craze with him at the moment as well, isn't it? I mean, everyone's talking about going to the polar caps and doing like diving into the water over there and crazy stuff.
I am a Wim Hof fan too.
So you probably know exactly what I'm talking about in terms of like that kind of mind over matter kind of mentality that you need to have to try and achieve like specific challenges and stuff like that for yourself. And so this was all based upon that. And we had a fire walk that 10,000 people in this auditorium were going to go through. There was fire brigade there. They had like these hot coals over 20, I think it was 20 feet, something like that. I can't remember exactly how long it was, but it felt like it was a long distance when I looked at it. And we had this mantra that we had to chant the entire day, almost like an anchor. And we had to program it in our minds to say, soft as grass, cold as ice, cold as ice, soft as grass. And we had to keep repeating that to ourselves whenever we would think about the coals. And then eventually the time came and I got into, I was waiting in the queue and I finally got to the front and I was just, soft as ice, cold as grass, soft as ice, cold as grass. Oh, actually, that's not, it was actually cold as ice, soft as grass. I was taking it backwards. No wonder I burned my feet.
That makes sense.
But no, I was saying it right at the time. So it was cold as ice, soft as grass. And I kept chanting it as I crossed, and I did it. I even have the certificate to prove it, and I didn't burn my feet. And it was a really scary thing to do. But I'm so glad that I did it because it kind of gives you that feeling that a lot of the limitations that we have in this world are of our own making. And that was, I guess, a manifestation of how we have the ability to control more than we think that we do.
Make sure you join us next week for a new episode on the Transformation series. Remember, finding you really does matter.